Good day, everybody, and good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us today. As you're aware, we have this at Tokyo College, we have this seminar series on the future of higher education. And it's wonderful today to kick off the series with a very notable speaker, somebody that I've known for a long time. And I'll introduce you to her. I'll introduce her to you in a few minutes. Just to say that this seminar series will continue in January and February and March, in fact, it goes on into March. And so we're really thankful that you've been able to join us today and hope that we can have some time for some discussion later on. I think there's, one of the most important questions that we have to face, those of us who are involved in higher education, is just what is the future of higher education with all the new pressures and dimensions of pressures, if you like, that are being brought to bear on the university systems around the world. Today we've got Hilligje van Lent, who's the Secretary General of the International Association of Universities. It's the largest association of universities. And it genuinely is international. It has membership from all the continents. And I guess more importantly, it's an active body. It's not a body that just meets at the time that there are sort of conferences and so on. It works on continuously across the globe on building, helping to build the higher education systems around the world. And it takes on the big questions, if you like. And more importantly, it also works with UNESCO and the other kind of major global enterprises on higher education. So on the one hand, it has the membership of individual universities and university systems, and on the other hand, it works with the sort of global organizations like UNESCO and so on. Hilligje has a PhD from Groningen, University of Groningen in the Netherlands, and her PhD is in Francophone literature, which is, it took me a while to come to grips with that. And she's taught in the Netherlands, in France, and in Canada. And I'm really pleased to say that actually we've actually worked together on other bodies, and maybe we'll refer to those a little later on. But more importantly, that we also co-wrote a couple of articles, yeah. So that's great. And so with that, I'm going to hand over to Hilligje. But before I do that, just to say that she'll speak for about 25 minutes, 20 or 25 minutes. And then I'll pose some questions to her, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So with that, I'm just going to hand over now to Hilligje.
Thank you very much for this very nice introduction, which is actually setting the tone also for our conversation here. A very warm welcome to the participants online. We hope that in a future not too far, we will be able to also see some opportunity to meet face-to-face. But this is a unique and very nice opportunity to also meet from around the world on a topic so important as what future for higher education in the contexts that we more or less know around the world, and what roles for higher education, as you so eloquently already put it, Ahmed Bawa, where do we go? So on the next slide, I just want to show where I speak from, and you said it already a bit. The IAU is a global association. It's the only global association that exists, and it's created by UNESCO in 1950 in order to build peace in the minds of people through higher education. It's an independent, international, non-governmental organization, yet working with many official partners in the UN system, as you said before. UNESCO because of our historical ties, but as well with ECOSOC, the UN in general, and many of the other UN organizations, but with many associations from around the world. So we're based in Paris, just in case you were wondering where the association speaks from, but we work with universities around the world. So on the next slide, you have an opportunity to just look at our vision, mission, and the idea is really to promote collaboration. And that's why we have been working together so much with Dr. Bawa over time on very various issues, including on the values upon which to build higher education. And if we go to the next slide, you will see that this is at the heart of everything that we do as an IAU. We have a set of values that we identified with the board of directors over time, and that we refine, rediscuss continuously. And you see that where we put a lot of emphasis is this importance on ethics and integrity, equity, solidarity, cooperation, global responsibility towards all communities with underlining the all, appreciation of diversity, certainly not to harmonize systems in order to deliver the same kind of education everywhere, but to connect the different knowledge systems, quality in learning and research and outreach. And last but not least, academic freedom and institutional autonomy. We will have an opportunity to get back to those, but I wanted to put those as a backdrop to much that we do. The next slide is just a transitional one where we can go to the next one, where I really want to say where this conversation starter for a whole series actually is also connecting to other global discussions and dialogues to which the IAU has contributed with its many members, with its experts and with its partners, in particular, again, Dr. Bawa as well. And I mentioned only a few here, but those may be interesting to connect to and for you to look up on the website on the internet, because they provide for additional information on where the conversation goes when we discuss the future of education at large and the position of higher education in the continuum of education from pre-primary to lifelong. And some recent events that I would like to mention are the UNESCO World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development, which took place online, but from Berlin in 2021, and re-emphasized the importance of looking at transformation of higher education with the lens of education for sustainable development and how that translates at the different educational levels. Then there is the Futures of Education initiative, a UNESCO-led initiative that resulted in a report on the futures of education that you will definitely be interested to consult and read. It's an open access book available online, which should help trigger further conversation and could fuel interesting debates on where education can or should go. This then was used as a backdrop to the UNESCO Third World Higher Education Conference that took place in Barcelona in May. And the IAU again had some 10 sessions that we co-organized, organized and promoted around very different aspects of higher education, and especially also the role of leadership, university leadership, when it comes to reimagining the future of higher education and how they work with the different stakeholders inside the institutions, from academic staff, students, administration, but also local communities, where to position higher education today for tomorrow. Then the UN TESS has gone under the radar a bit, but that TES stands for Transforming Education Summit, with a pre-summit in Paris and then a summit in New York in September on the fringes of the UN General Assembly. As well, discussing what do we mean by transformation, what is then required, and that's where you all on the screen and in your different universities have a very important role in shaping these transformations. There is a current consultation at global level that you will be able to find, and otherwise you can write to me and I can share the link, where you can contribute actually to this consultation on what kind of transformation is expected. And this dialogue is also built on the IAU webinar series on the future of higher education. You will find some 60 webinars available with ×3 experts from around the world discussing the future of higher education, and as well our magazine IAU Horizons, which title already points to the fact that we look at the horizon and the future horizon for education. So the next slide is really to give a few examples of where you could go, and you can probably then later on also consult the PowerPoint and click directly on these links. The first one is again an open access book, which was created to honor 70 years of international collaboration of the IAU. The reason why I mention it here, it's because it also, well, it has invited some 65 experts from around the world to look at the value of higher education collaboration, to think about where university come from and where is the university actually going. So these texts are relatively small, but again, very good conversation starters for rethinking collaboration at global level in the current context. So if we go to the next slide, I wanted to also, after having discussed where the series could go, position the conversation in the context of the global geopolitical events that actually shape the future of higher education. Impact of COVID-19 is obvious. We sit here in a room with plastic windows on each side. You are on screen. We know that many of the impacts are the pivoting online of higher education and the consequences thereof. What is it that we envisage for the future? What is it that we learn through the pandemic with emergency responses to COVID-19 and the need to continue higher education research and also community engagement of universities? So that's shaping the future in a very serious way, where we will have to look at what is the impact on the virtualization of higher education moving into the future. Then there's global insecurity in many forms and shapes that comes with next point, armed conflicts with global impacts, with including socioeconomic or energy crisis, to name very concrete examples of the impacts of these global conflicts that impact society at large, and they impact higher education. Why? Because we rethink the way in which we work around the world, whom we work with, and why do we work with XYZ. Universities have a role to play to also rise above these global contexts and still look at how to engage meaningfully in collaboration at the global level, and to address the next points, the rising inequalities, to address the issues of declining democracies, and where that actually has, again, an impact on the kind of higher education that we can provide inside disciplines, across disciplines, and also what kind of an education that will allow the universities to provide moving again into the future, in order to equip the learners, staff of academic and even at the governance level of institutions, to equip everyone in order for the higher education experience to enable those who come through the higher education sector to address the global goals that we face with all the knowledge that we need from different perspectives. So on the next slide, you will see that this has serious impact, because the new tensions between countries affect cooperation. I believe that in all your universities, you will be able to already see how the internationalization dynamics have transformed over the last few years due to COVID, but now again due to other new tensions between countries, how it impacts the mobility physically, but also how it impacts the way in which we work together. And we, through the different global surveys that we carry out on the impact of COVID-19, the global surveys on the transformation of internationalization, and the global surveys on the future of engagement of higher education in sustainable development, we see sadly a decrease of collaboration at local and global level. And we see, again, increased competition, where we actually were moving towards more collaboration and more co-creation of a future together, where we would maximize on the opportunities that are offered by each and every institution in its full diversity, and then co-opt the knowledge that would be created and move into the future together. But there is, again, siloization that we see coming up which is something that we have to be very vigilant about and find new solutions. So there's a multiplication of effort, waste of resources. There is the challenges to institutional autonomy, academic freedom, and a fragmentation and isolation, again, of research and education. So let's be very careful when we think about the future. Keep that in mind and combat it with all the weapons that we have. So if we go to the next, this slide is actually what I would like to say. Higher education matters, and high quality higher education is the answer to the future. And that high quality higher education goes through cooperation. So if we move to the next slide, indeed, many governments stop at the first sentence, I would say, prepare for the labor market. Yet we need all these three other points when we think about where higher education has to lead those who go through the higher education experience. We have to prepare for life and students to become active citizens in democratic societies. Yes, we need to ensure personal development, because that will ensure that people then also can engage with the knowledge that they acquire, and that they can contribute to addressing the issues that we face and enter into the labor force with a kind of knowledge that is different from the one that we've seen so far, and also can question the labor market itself and its future orientations. Because we are to foster and ensure a very broad-based and advanced knowledge base for all, that is not based only on the knowledge from one part of the world, but really from all the different parts of the world. We're sitting here with already three expertise. There is also great support from colleagues here from Tokyo University. So we have Asia, we have Africa, we have Europe. So already we have a conversation that is very international. So if we move to the next slide, where I would like to highlight the other dimensions that come straight to the table of decision makers in higher education, the leadership, the massification of higher education. What does that mean? How will we then have to address that in future scenarios? How will we be able to ensure that there is more inclusivity in higher education and address the issue of disparities, of difficulty of provision and delivery of higher education, even in a context like this one, where we believe that the virtual dimensions and the pivoting online would be the answer to much, where we see that many countries or institutions or individuals still face many severe issues when it comes to accessibility. So digital transformation of higher education comes with many opportunities, yet with as many risks as well, that we could consider and that you will also consider in the context of the theories. There are funding challenges. I hear, since I'm here in Tokyo now for a week, that there are serious challenges to finances at the national level, with the valuing of our different currencies, but also considering the global context again. But I'm also confident in the idea that that may be a good opportunity to look at the many opportunities and the richness of what universities have to offer, and that they can actually look at different ways of doing things that would address that challenge, but avoid going to total privatization of our institutions as a result of it. So the overall landscape is transforming and shaping higher education, and we have a say in how it is shaping. So if we go to the next slide, I would like to just put at the middle this challenge that the leadership faces, and also a challenge to academics. The 4 E's are heavyweight on the shoulders of the many and the different stakeholders within the institution. The leadership, the academic staff, but also the students. The 4 E's are, we have to look at employability, but is it not also the case that with a very broad basis of knowledge, we will be able to shape new employments, and we will be able to create new employment opportunities. We will be able to challenge the employment market as it is today, because it is often at the heart of the problems and the challenges that we face. So maybe it's also to be confronted, that employability dialogue. Excellence is never defined, and what is excellence efficient, according to whom and how. And that is something that constantly should be on the agendas of our institutions and looked at with the lens of not only sustainable development, but equity challenges, with inclusivity, with the opportunity to work together. Efficiency, according to which rules, often from the marketplace, and we know that universities live in a different space and time, and they need to remain there as well, yet connecting with the different dynamics around in an institution. And entrepreneurship, we've seen the effects of that over time. And we've had many conversations with many colleagues from different universities this week here in Japan, where we've seen that the entrepreneurial dimension and push to universities to develop startups, etc., is also diverting from the core activities of the university. So when we look at the next slide, what does this then mean for higher education? What does the discourse tell us about the future of higher education, and what are the kinds of scenarios that do emerge? I've put 5 on the screen, and that's where our conversation will also start, and we'll allow to deepen it. The status quo would be, will universities remain as they are? Is that possible? Is that desirable? And how would that work? Will universities at the same time still, in the current context, become more student-centered? And what does that mean? If student-centered should not mean automatically student-led, but it should be co-creation again. Will they become more market-driven even in the current context of institutions? What about foresight, future thinking? How is that going to be impacted by the current situation? And so will we be able to ensure that universities continue to be supported strongly by national, provincial, or state governments, which would be one of the scenarios. The second one is the entire privatization or commercialization of higher education. We see this everywhere being increased. It started off very insidiously, I would say, with we privatized the canteen, we privatize the dorms, we privatize the library, we privatize little by little the administration of student mobility, we privatize the hiring process. And then there's this tension or this tendency to also go to commercialization of the higher education system, where we now start to sell courses to the business, or we develop and co-develop. So this is something that is, and I would maybe use the word insidious again, because it is at the expenses of many of the things that are happening. Universities are to be built around spaces that are available for co-creation. So if your canteen or your cafeterias are no longer there for students to sit, exchange, discuss, come together, because they come with new dynamics that are from the private sector, that will be a complex issue, and it's often referred to as the McDonaldization of higher education as well. Then the other dynamics is entrepreneurial universities. Again, nothing against this, and I introduced that knowledge of against or pro. It's for the discussion. There are entrepreneurial universities, and that's perfectly fine, but I heard in conversations recently that this should become a whole of system approach to universities, that all should become entrepreneurial all of a sudden. And from where I sit at the global level, I see that that will not be the solution, because it will again be a one-sided approach to what universities can offer. And it will be to the detriment of the quality of higher education and of research, if that would be the only model. I think we need to emphasize the need for many different models to coexist, and allow to move back to differentiation even of the name university, which we had before. And we got rid of polytechnics, we got rid of this, that, and then everything became a university. But maybe it is time to also reconsider that, yes, there is a value in differentiation in order for every one of us in our societies to find their feet in the system, and also find what they need and what society needs to move forward. So alternative competing structures will also be very interesting, and that's where the Googles come in, in short. where you have many other providers that are not built on the values that I showed at the beginning necessarily. There is a attempt to that, but there is also deregulation that comes with it that is probably something that, or not probably, that is something that is definitely to be looked at very carefully, because we want better societies, we want better educated people, and thus we want to ensure that if a student cannot enter the system that is offered at the national level or in the private sector that is also connected to the national level with the quality assurance that are there, the quality frameworks that are carefully crafted together, but they're simply offered in an alternative way and more piecemeals. You can take a sandwich here and water there, and you construct your own meal around what you believe as a learner you need, without knowing that the wealth of opportunities that are available if you are in a more comprehensive institution. That's as well something that we have to look at. That comes with also a deconstruction of the whole credentialing system and certification models that are available around the world, and very important to look at, because if we only go for micro credentials, micro certificates, and the blockchain construction of the certification that would create the future, probably we would narrow our worldviews and instead of opening them. Virtual institutions, they can be complementary to what we do. We also hear a lot of questioning about the value of virtual dimensions. And so some governments in the midst of COVID or after COVID have also considered these new virtual options as alternatives to the high cost of maintaining buildings and institutions in brick and mortar. But that as well needs to be watched very carefully in order for the university as a university in the full dimensions of the word itself, with the universe as our vision for the future, that we can work together. And so virtual institutions to some extent, but I would say that all these different models could be coexisting, but using as well one of the major initial ideas of a university as a place to come together. So I know my time is going fast and ticking, but I would like to go to the next slide to maybe come up with some, or I tried to summarize what the discussions have told us, and that there is a real need to re-emphasize the necessity to look at higher education institutions as key stakeholders in our society. They need to be trusted and supported, both internally and externally. Otherwise, they will not be able to transform, and the transformation probably needs to be done in a slower motion than what is expected from society, in order for transformation to settle in, to be adopted, to become effective, and for universities to be really transformative as it should. And then if there is this trust that is built in, it will allow us to transform the system and move into the future. So we have to really look critically at where we stand, what it means to teach, what it means to undertake research, to what end, to look at community engagement and with a new lens. We need to look at where we want to go. We need to look at all these models that are available and being considered, and we should, and the we being the higher education system and the institutions and the individuals within, need to be very aware of all the discussions that are taking place, and we should go the extra mile out of our comfort zone and engage with these conversations in order for the transformation that is about to happen to be done in accordance with the wealth of knowledge about what higher education means moving into the future. So we need to learn to change as well inside, to really engage with these conversations, to move out of our silos and our own comforts and comforts that are coming with its challenges. So I'm not saying that it's all comfortable, but I'm saying that we need to engage in these conversations in order to accept the idea of a true systemic change, because there are challenges to the way higher education is being carried out today, but there are opportunities to transform it, and universities can become more socially responsible in order to help foster the kind of education, research, and community opportunities that will allow universities to address those. So just two last slides to complement this. So we can consider all these scenarios and look at the opportunities, but we certainly have to constantly jointly define what makes for high quality higher education that will meet the needs of the world. So emerging industries, I put it in because we know that that is a real buzzword as well. Industries in all its senses, emerging industries also in culture, emerging industry in the social sciences. So not only the world of business and enterprises that we think about when we think industry, but very broadly speaking. And we definitely need to co-design the future together, including the staff and students, and think about connecting the education levels. In many of the conversations, we see a lot of attention being paid to pre-primary to secondary education, then lifelong. But there is kind of a void and an attempt to not discuss the future of higher education in the sequencing from pre-primary to lifelong. And yet that is detrimental to the future, because higher education is a key player in the whole movement and moving towards the future together. And that sometimes is pushed back in the name of autonomy and institutional freedom. But it's for the bad reasons, because it is not harming autonomy to discuss the future of higher education together in the sequencing and the overall. So the last slide is leading to the conversation, so that I can finally give the floor back to you. So we have to look at higher education as a common good. Education is not a tool of a gross national product. It is a really collective act of co-creation and co-construction. That's where we can go together. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you so much, Hilligje. I think that's a really wonderful kind of indication of the kind of landscape, if you like, that I think we have to deal with. And I mean, for me at least, it's an exciting time for higher education, and we've had these really significant kind of stress tests, with COVID-19 and with the COVID-19 pandemic, and I think it's forced us to really kind of look at some of these deeper questions. And so your perhaps your first slide, I think the first slide of the of the kind of the gist of your presentation, I think is probably the one that's most important at this point in time. It's just this real challenge we have around the shifting geopolitics, and coming to grips with how we can, how do universities kind of address this challenge around geopolitics, especially at a time when the grand challenges we face as humanity are both global and local. Are there other thoughts that you might have around that?
Well, at the International Association of Universities, we have been created post-Second World War. The idea actually started between the two world wars, where there was already a voiced need for better cooperation at global level in order to avoid wars at large. And so when in 1945, discussions started again on how to create peace in the minds of people, education came up as first, and higher education certainly as well. And so the initial groups of higher education leaders that came together, when you look at the books that we have in the library at the International Association of Universities, they're fascinating because they're really all about that. speak with all those who are usually not at the table, because if you're not at the table and there's no discussion, it's even worse than having them at the table, even in geopolitical context, where sometimes there is the perception that there is no dialogue because we're from too diverse a world. But on the contrary, we need to continuously build these connections across walls, across. During the Cold War, there were many conversations that the IU did lead on connecting the unconnectedness across the world. And today we are faced with the same. There is new cleavages between continents, between countries, and that will not help solve the issues moving to the future.
You know, I think that that's accurate. I mean, for me at least, one of the things that we have to begin to pay attention to is how universities themselves navigate this difficult time, especially when sort of governments are kind of, aligning with one part of the global geopolitics and not the other. So it's an interesting one. And from my point of view, at least from the African point of view, I think what we're also seeing is a kind of resurgence of the idea of non-alignment. And I think that, that's something that we have to pay attention to as well. I think it is.
We do, and in all the disciplines, and not only in the humanities or in history or political science, but also in physics, in chemistry, in economics, because we've seen the detrimental effects of keeping out certain voices at the table. We've had very telling conversations with universities that have been under embargo and not able to work with other universities around the world in the Middle East, for instance, who have at a recent IU conference said, but don't go there when talking about the current situation, and we can put it on the table between Russia and Ukraine. Don't replicate what happened to us. It's taken a minute to deconstruct collaborative efforts and co-construction of a future. It has taken decades to rebuild. So we also have to look at that in a it's very important to look at that. Yes.
Colleagues on the other side of the screen, if you have questions, let us know, either by sort of putting up your hands, I think which Wenlu will be able to pick up, or else if you put something into the chat, we'll pick it up. But let me just proceed. I think one of the most interesting things that you mentioned was, I think your penultimate slide was this issue around kind of universities being trusted and need to be trusted. And of course, alongside that, it's the issues around the long-term sustainability of our universities and so on. Of course, that goes hand in hand with something else, which is, what is the extent of social ownership of our universities? And what do universities have to do to enhance social ownership? Have you given any thought to that?
Yes, we at the International Association of Universities, we've given a lot of thought to that on how to do that and what it means. And sometimes it's translated into very easy, or it looked easy, but easy ways of bringing, for instance, the local communities onto the campus through cultural activities, or there was a beautiful example I could give from Ireland in Cork, where a university campus was built close to, on purpose, next to the hospital. And the way to get to the hospital, you had to go through the university. There was no other way around. So where people sometimes would have shied away because there is a wall, physical wall around the university, they would not cross that wall, even though the gates would be open. But there you had to walk through. And the walkthrough initiated parents who had never set foot in the university themselves to sit in the gardens, consider this space, and actually deconstructed this fear of a space that was not for them. You would have the same in Europe, in many different places where through transdisciplinary approaches to issues of local relevance, you would have an opening up to cultural aspects and bringing the people on campus. And a last example in Costa Rica was also a very nice experiment where the University of Costa Rica wanted to address the issue of drugs and drugs addiction in the population, has built a campus of the main campus. And that building was constructed with architects to consider how you can do that. And the whole building was an open beehive with no windows, doors. And so people would come in and out and would be welcomed. So it starts with little baby steps, but it has also the other opportunity. Similarly, I would say when a lot of research has been done on communities, it was too often done without the communities and without return of investment of the time of the communities of the outcomes of the projects. And I believe you're also sitting on the International Science Council, Dr. Bauer, and there as well, I know there is a lot of reflection about how to translate research outcomes back into communities in order to co-create this understanding of the value of a university.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I mean, it's I'm so impressed with the University of Tokyo. It's completely open campus, and and also the hospital is on the campus. It's I mean, there really is a strong kind of in the community around it. Is my perception is that there's a strong affinity to the university. There are three hands up. Let's start with Mahadi Katsuma. Please come in.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Mahadi Katsuma, and I work for the University of Tsukuba. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And my question is directed towards this slide in which you talked about how universities need to be trusted and supported, how they need to look critically at where they stand, where they need to go, and then they need to learn how to change. So my question is, and this is just a very general question, I'm just asking for your opinion, but why are universities slow to change? Why are they slow to show their value? And why is it so difficult for universities to chart their course? If you could share your opinions regarding that. Thank you very much.
Do you want to take a few questions or shall I respond?
I think respond.
This is a very important, and hello to the University of Tsukuba. I had the pleasure to meet with one of your colleagues last night, and University of Tsukuba is working with us a lot on also.
Yes, thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Yes, it's we also work together in the context of the IU Global Cluster on Higher Education and Research for Sustainable Development. And I know that your university is also working on the transformation itself of the university. And why is a university slow to transform? Maybe it's a good thing because every quick change is not necessarily one to stay, not one that will necessarily also have the time to settle in a university. I could give examples of countries around the world that impose one transformation or one new set of rules every year onto a university, and you see fatigue of, okay, you have to settle in, you have to transform things, but you also have to test it, you have to implement it, and then you can look at next steps in the transformative dynamics. It takes always two to tango, but I would say it could even take 3, 4, 5 to tango, meaning that a dense and a transformative process will need to look at the leadership at the start, and then also see how that leadership is taking on this transformation idea and accepting to engage in conversations at different levels. I know that in some countries there is a very hierarchical approach to who leads and how do you engage with universities, and that is not the case in only one country, but in many. But there is this dynamic and leadership opportunity to transform a university to better engage with global challenges. I hear from movements that are either nationally fostered, but they sometimes are also at regional level. I can give the example of, you will be able to talk to the African experience. I can talk about the European experience as well, where you have the European higher education area. That was a voluntary dynamics in Europe between governments who came together to think, well, how are we going to shape the future of higher education together? And nothing is mandatory, but the process has been evolving over time and is transforming universities from within. It started with finding new ways to ensure correspondence between accreditation systems, and looking at new topics to be addressed in institutions, to debate at regional level, the whole European regional level, the notion of transdisciplinarity. So that's a movement. But then you also have student movements. The students themselves demand something new. And I believe that with COVID, they will come in much more strongly. So it is up to a university to also facilitate opportunities for students to create student unions, to debate topics, to involve them in conversations. And that will probably allow to address these transformative needs that a university needs to look into in order to better serve society.
Thank you so
very
much.
Thank you very much.
Next, let's take Chunyan Lee, who's a postdoc at Tokyo College, actually. So,
yeah.
please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Alain, for the wonderful presentation. I think my question is about the chicken and egg question. So one purpose of higher education is to prepare the students for the job market. So I'm wondering, like, does the job market prescribe or define where higher education is heading to, or are we as educational institutions should define where guide where the market is heading? So and in terms of the decision process, I wanted to know who are the decision makers in terms of we're talking about the future of higher education. Thank you.
I think you have a beautiful Munch picture behind you with the screen.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And I think that is quite symptomatic of where we are. So, where are we going together? It's a very symbolic visual. We cannot have the university's future being defined by the business world. The business world is at the heart of many of the challenges that we face, and they're unsustainable very often. They're not navigating the world in which we want to live for the future. There's a lot of consumerism, consumption, instead of a sustainable approach to things. So the whole model on which the society is built is one that has to be rethought. And that's where higher education has a key role to play. So in terms of transforming the curricula that are being developed in universities, yes, that's the important point where the different stakeholders have a say, but where also there is a real need for cross-fertilization of ideas within the institution and looking outside at society, what is happening. But the future, who can look through the looking glass, and who knows what the future will be made of? We have to have that opportunity to have the space for minds to really reflect on where the future can go, but also where the future should go and where the future should not go. Because we see a lot today, to give an example, artificial intelligence. Asia is very strong on moving in terms of developing many different avenues linked to artificial intelligence. There are many issues that are fantastic, but I'm also sure that some of us will lead us straight into the wall if we continue along those lines. So that's where I believe universities have the unique opportunity to foster critical minds. And that's so important. And if we only tailor to the market, imagine you start your education year 1, you get out of it university year 10 or year 5 or year 4 or year X. Along those years, the whole market outside will have transformed, and so you're already too late. So I don't think that the business can shape. The business can be at the table in order to help shape the future, but should not be in the lead.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julian. Now we can go to Miki Sugimura.
Yes, thank you very much, Doctor. Hi, nice to see you again.
Okay.
Thank you very much for taking my questions. Yeah, today I'm very fascinated by your wonderful lecture, and especially I'm focusing on the quality assurance issues through the knowledge diplomacy on the collaboration in the higher education sector. As I already mentioned, it now the Futures of Education by UNESCO report emphasize the importance of the higher education institute and the higher education network and collaboration, also solidarity in the global affairs. And on the other hand, there are several international networks like the EU, Erasmus, or even in Asia, we have observed a very dynamic, the ASEAN higher education zone here through the transnational or cross-border education. On the other hand, we must assure the quality issues in higher education. Otherwise, it's a little difficult for us to keep maintain the sustainable, very inclusive the higher education system. So now Tokyo Convention or Global Convention has already ratified. So as IAU, how can you think of the balance between the institutional initiative or the government initiative or regional initiative and global initiative? We have the several kind of layer of these assuring the quality assurance. So as my institute is Sophia University in Tokyo, so we are now involved in this kind of area, but from which perspective we can involve in these kind of issues more? So that is my question. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Very much. It was wonderful to also meet face to face at Sophia University.
Yes, thank you.
On Tuesday. Thank you for the wonderful hosting.
Thank you for visiting us.
Is a wonderful picture of the oldest building of Sophia University. And
Yes.
the reason why I allude to it is that it's also talking to the need for brick and mortar and continue long into the future. Around that building, you have many futuristic ones, and you also have a fantastic campus that you can enter from one and exit from the other, as what you said about Tokyo University as well. And in the middle, you have you. And you as a person and researcher, it's also wonderful to see how you go the extra mile and you're involved very much in the Futures of Education initiative and the quality assurance dynamics indeed around the world. And I think that's where I was saying that we really need to ensure that we take the time to engage in these conversations. We cannot have these regional dynamics or international dynamics, or global dynamics be led without the voice of higher education. It takes time and effort. It takes a lot of effort as well to understand these dynamics. As you just said, they are sometimes complementary, but sometimes also in tension. But I believe that recently these World Conference ESD, which followed up on the World Conference on ESD in Aichi, Nagoya back in 2015. But that whole movement of transformation is led also with the strong contribution of higher education researchers, administrators, and that's where those dynamics need to be constantly discussed. So it takes time. It is also a matter, again, of trust and understanding amongst ourselves. So the Asia dynamics is one that is very positive, but should not close up. The European one is very interesting and very positive, but should not close up. So we also need to ensure this cross-feeding between dynamics at international level. There's a very interesting development in Europe that you are all probably aware of, is this creation of European University Alliances, which are taking a lot of time of international relations officers to concentrate on the co-creation of these new spaces across borders, yet in Europe. And there are very important discussions that the IAU is involved in to ensure that this will not, again, create a space that will be inward-looking, but is really looking at opportunities to consolidate the capacity of diverse universities to come together to offer better education, and yet offer that better quality education to the many, and is also fueled with knowledge that comes from all the other parts of the world. So I don't know if I responded clearly to your question, but the question, as I understand it, is really how to make sure that these discussions resonate with each other and don't and are not encapsulated and are closing. I would like to commend your work in doing so, because you're also building these bridges and dynamics across.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think that universities, being knowledge-intensive institutions, are natural bridges between these different dimensions, if you like it.
Yeah.
So
they're natural bridges, but it's not always easy, because we also see another tension coming up, where in universities, any of the people of the academic community is tasked with an enormous amount of administration. And so you also to have headspace. And that's where I sometimes would say that some universities should allow to slow down a little in order to offer the opportunity for those who have the opportunity to have the headspace to think about how to take the future.
Sure. Yeah. If there are any other questions, please just put your hands up. But in the meantime, I'm going to throw another question at you. We're both on this global cooperation for the democratic mission of universities.
Yes.
And I think the one thing that we are seeing in many parts of the world, is just the erosion, not the erosion, I should say, but the threats to democracy and so on. And now there are two sides to this, right? The one is just the kind of getting universities to be much more effective in building democratic culture and so on. But there's another side to it, which is the impact of the erosion of democracy on universities. Right? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think Dr. Bauer is referring to a global cooperation that we initiated together with one of the speakers that will come after.
Yeah,
Ira Harkerby and the Netter Center in the US, but also OAS, the Organization of American States, the Council of Europe, the International Association of Universities, University of South Africa has been heavily involved, and other players. There was a need for this global cooperation to be created and to on every 2 years to really continue the conversation about why is democracy being eroded? What does it mean, and what are the impacts on universities? Indeed, as you say, if academic freedom, institutional autonomy, and being part of and at the heart of democracy are being attacked, and if universities then cannot put in place the democratic mechanisms inside their institution, then we will see that the capacity of universities to deliver on their promise will be eroded everywhere. And it is, we see it in the Middle East, where students are now going to the street. We see it in Europe, where students also are engaged very strongly in it. We see it in the US, where even staff is going to the street and calling for a real transformation inside the institution to put in place the kind of democratic mechanisms that will allow to go to one of my slides, principles, the co-creation of the future. So it is essential that democracy is being fueled and fostered actually from pre-primary education through to lifelong, because it's a whole life education mechanism. It's not because you've learned about democracy that you're a democratic person yourself. So to be involved in conversations, discussions, opportunities to engage with these dynamics is very important. With the Council of Europe and an international dynamic team there as well, we created a global framework, or actually it was a European framework at the beginning on competencies for democratic culture, where there was this strong link between the skills approach, which is often referred to as the future for universities, where we challenge it and say we need to go to competencies, we need to also go to values, and all these dynamics need to always be looked at in a dynamic way, put on the wall, be re-emphasized. They need to appear in canteens, they need to be in structures that offer for each and everyone to participate in the dynamics. And it goes back to the question from the university, the colleague from the University of Tsukuba. How then can you go to further transforming your systems? It will be thanks to this co-creation that is democracy at heart.
Thank you so much. That brings us very much to the end of the hour. I'd like to like to thank you very much for taking the time out. I know you've been very busy.
There is somebody online.
Oh,
is it online from University? Oh. Yes. Just with a question or no?
I don't think it's a question. Is there a question? No. Thank you so much. So just say thank you very much. I know you've been very busy here in Japan, and taking the time out has been I'm really grateful.
Honor for me.
No, thank you. And also just to say to all the participants on the other side, thank you so much for being there and participating in this. And I hope very much that you'll join us again in January, February, and March. And I see Carl Becker is there from Kyoto University. Thank you for joining us today, Carl. But just to say thank you to all of you, and hope very much, in fact, that this conversation will continue, and that it will, the future ones will probe in slightly more detail, kind of all the issues that that Hilligje kind of raised. I mean, so thank you so much for this kind of all-encompassing sort of landscape laying kind of opportunity.
I very much look forward to continuing to follow those conversations because I think you have a very nice lineup of sessions. I was very honored to have been invited to kickstart the series, and thank you for inviting me here.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody, and I'd like to also thank Wenlu Wang for supporting us today, and rest of the team, and just to say thank you very much. And I guess one of the big questions for us is always just to try and make sure that we don't have these conversations just at times of crisis.
No.
That we have to keep this conversation going, it seems to me, and I think that's something that we have to work at
strongly.
Yeah.
There's always a little crisis somewhere, so we can continue and say there's also crisis that comes with opportunities, and we will go. I see one of the Kenji Kakuta has a fantastic identity picture there, and maybe that is future foresight, and that we have to make sure that these conversations indeed remain on the table. You're right, definitely.
With that, let me say thank you again, and
wonderful.
Safe trip back.
Thank you.
Thank you.